All right, let's get into it. We're talking about a story of crisis, power, and, believe it or not, one of the most controversial works of art ever made.
So, in 1541, a pope pulls back the curtain on this masterpiece, and it covers the entire altar wall of the Sistine Chapel. The artist? None other than the legendary Michelangelo, and the work was his vision of the Last Judgment.
Now, this thing was a swirling, terrifying, just overwhelming vision of the end of days. And let me tell you, the world was absolutely scandalized. This was not the calm, orderly vision of heaven people were used to. No, this was chaotic, it was visceral, you could almost feel the figures writhing with this raw, painful energy.
The criticism was immediate, and it was harsh. I mean, listen to what the papal master of ceremonies himself said. And the biggest issue? All those nude figures, hundreds of them, even Christ himself. In an age that was getting more and more religiously conservative, this was, well, it was deeply shocking.
So that begs the question, right? Why would a holy man, Pope Clement VII, commission something so profane? To get that, we have to look past the painting. We have to understand the man who wanted it made and the absolutely catastrophic world he was living in. The real story isn't just on the wall, it's in what the Pope himself had lived through. Okay, so let's meet the man. Before he was Pope Clement VII, he was Giulio de Medici, a guy who, for all intents and purposes, seemed absolutely destined for greatness. And his story starts with tragedy. His father was actually murdered in the Pazzi conspiracy. He ends up being raised by his famous uncle Lorenzo the Magnificent. And by all accounts, Giulio was the real deal, smart, handsome, and incredibly competent. You know, being a key member of the Medici family, he was basically groomed for leadership his whole life, surrounded by the greatest minds and artists of the Renaissance, including a young Michelangelo. And his rise was just meteoric. Look at this. In 1513, he's made archbishop and then cardinal. By 1517, he's the Pope's de facto second-in-command. A couple years later, he's ruling Florence, and people are praising his government. And then, bam, 1523, he's elected Pope Clement VII, with this sky-high reputation as a statesman. He was seen as the steady hand, the brilliant tactician. Expectations couldn't have been higher. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? The world he inherited as Pope was an absolute tinderbox of conflict. So Clement's papacy was just one crisis after another. You've got the Protestant Reformation spreading like wildfire, a church that's basically bankrupt, and foreign armies marching all over Italy. And here's the thing. He was a smart guy, but as one historian put it, he just could not wrap his head around how much the world had changed. He couldn't see the Pope's new, diminished position in a Europe of powerful nation-states. He was playing an old game, but the rules had completely changed on him. And this is the trap he was in. On one side, you have the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, the most powerful ruler in Europe. On the other, King Francis I of France, his great rival. Both of them are breathing down his neck, demanding his absolute loyalty. Clement tried to play them against each other. You know, a classic Italian political move. But it was about to backfire in the most disastrous way possible. And that brings us to the catastrophe. In 1527, Clement finally sides with France, and Emperor Charles V's army, which, by the way, was unpaid and mutinous, decides to march on Rome. What happened next was an event of unimaginable horror. For weeks, the city was just subjected to murder, rape, vandalism. It was an orgy of destruction that ended the splendors of Renaissance Rome forever. This was the dramatic turning point, the trauma that would define Clement's entire papacy. This wasn't just a military loss. For the people living through it, it was the apocalypse. It completely shattered the psyche of the eternal city.
And the Pope himself? His ordeal was terrifying. One, he barely escapes to the Castel Sant'Angelo just as the army is smashing through the city walls. Two, he's forced to surrender and is held prisoner for 6 agonizing months. 3, he finally escapes, but how? Disguised as a common peddler, slipping out of his own city. Can you imagine the humiliation? The head of the Catholic Church, a prisoner, watching Rome burn from the windows of his fortress?
400,000 ducats. That was the ransom. A staggering sum that Clement agreed to pay for his life, which of course just plunged the already broke church even deeper into debt. And as a sign of mourning for what happened to Rome, Clement VII grew a full beard. This was a huge deal. It became a practice that the next 24 popes followed for over a century.
That physical change, it was this constant, visible symbol of the trauma and grief he carried with him until the day he died. The smooth-shaven face of that confident Renaissance man was gone forever, replaced by the face of someone who had literally witnessed hell on earth.
And this is where it all comes full circle. This is where we go back to that painting. Because when you know this story, when you know about this disaster, Michelangelo's fresco starts to make a whole different kind of sense.
You see, the terror, the despair, the absolute chaos of the sack of Rome, it's all channeled directly onto that altar wall in the Sistine Chapel. This painting isn't just some textbook depiction of a biblical event. No, it's a raw, visceral reflection of a world that had just seen the apocalypse firsthand. It was Clement's personal trauma visualized by the genius of Michelangelo.
And you can see it everywhere. Look at the boatman, Charon, aggressively beating the damned with his oar as he ferries them to hell. That's a scene ripped straight from Dante's Inferno. It just perfectly captures the raw, violent energy that pulses through the entire piece. This isn't some quiet theological debate on a wall. It's the pure terror of damnation, something the people of Rome had just lived through. And Michelangelo had a bit of a savage side too. When the papal master of ceremonies, a guy named Biagio da Cesena, complained about all the nudity, what did Michelangelo do? He painted Cesena's face onto Minos, the judge of the underworld, complete with donkey ears and a snake biting his genitals. Now, the best part of this story is that when Cesena went complaining to the Pope, Clement supposedly just joked that his jurisdiction didn't extend to hell, so, sorry, the portrait would have to stay.
But what about Michelangelo himself? Well, many believe he painted his own self-portrait into the flayed skin of St. Bartholomew. See it there? Just dangling over the pits of hell. I mean, wow, it's such a powerful and disturbing symbol of an artist grappling with his own faith, with his own suffering, in a suffering age. He puts himself in the scene, not as some hero, but as a hollowed-out victim. It's a testament to his own spiritual anxiety.
So in the end, what's the takeaway here? How is Clement VII remembered?
Well, Clement VII has been called the most unfortunate of the popes, and it's hard to argue with that. His reign was a political train wreck that saw Rome utterly devastated. Oh, and on top of that, England broke away from the Catholic Church over Henry VIII's divorce, a crisis he was totally powerless to stop because he was basically under the emperor's thumb.
His legacy is just full of these contradictions. On the one hand, his papacy was marked by indecision and political failure, and yet he was a great patron of the arts. He commissioned geniuses like Raphael, Cellini, and of course, Michelangelo. And his final great commission, the one he affirmed just days before he died, was The Last Judgment. So while his political legacy is one of failure, that final artistic commission gave the world this unparalleled, unforgettable reflection of that very crisis. In the end, the art outlived the calamity.
Which leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? Does great crisis create great art? The story of Pope Clement VII and The Last Judgment really suggests that. Sometimes the most enduring masterpieces aren't born from times of peace and prosperity. Sometimes they're forged in the very fires of crisis itself.